Okay, so a couple thoughts right off the jump. I said he was going to do average, like good enough. And there were definitely some big flubs, but ultimately I think he did good enough. Okay. So what do I mean by this? There's long periods. He filibustered a lot. This is not a super contentious. Just listen to my words before you hit me with the copium. Okay. Ben Shapiro had this tweet where he said he started off rough and he's still having rough patches, but this is good enough to keep him in the race, which is terrible news for Democrats and excellent news for Trump. Now, I don't think that is enough for the Democrats to not come out with their statements, okay? But it will cause enough of the holdouts to refrain from saying something, okay? I still think that a lot of the Democrats are going to start popping off. Representative Jim Himes of D. Connecticut, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, asked Joe Biden to step aside. This is from 1 minute ago. Look at his reply. Maybe I spoke too soon. He's yelling and jabbering. The wisdom of doing this press conference at NATO is clear. Shaky on other stuff. The POTUS is very comfortable on national security issues. The last second whisper is bad. Obviously, he had really impactful moments within this presser that everyone is going to pay attention to. So he's f***ed anyway. Okay? He was f***ed before he did this presser, and he's still f***ed after this presser. But we're f***ed because he did not collapse entirely like he did at the debate. Why do I say this? It's because while the additional people from the Democratic Party that were slated to release their pressers or slated to release their PR statements about how Biden should step aside are still going to come up, okay? They're still going to come out and say it because this is not instilling confidence in anybody. And to be fair, there was no way that he could patch something so glaringly obvious that so many people are now saying, which is that he's too old to perform, too old to function, right? But he got just enough rope, just enough, especially on the NATO shit, which is his bread and butter, that this will give him the copium and all of his sycophants enough ammunition to say, oh, where are you now? Okay? Because he was, for long enough sequences throughout the filibuster, especially as it pertains to NATO, pretty coherent. However, there are a couple things that you have to pay attention to. I said 2 things to pay attention to with Biden's big boy presser. He's slowed down significantly over the course of the past hour. He has a time limit to how long he can perform. Number 2, the difference in pace, tone, and coherence between reading the prompter in the beginning versus off-the-cuff answers is massive. You put that side by side, and people will still understand the exact same point. Now, also, obviously, the Vice President Trump moment is going to be the most significant flub here that everyone is going to hyper-focus on. He said, okay, wait, Biden was asked, David Dayen had a good take on this. He said, Biden was asked what changed on him being a bridge to the next generation. He says, what changed was what he inherited. He spent his entire news conference saying that the economy's great, border crossings down, crime down, inflation down. Why isn't it a good time? Obviously, it's because he's selfish. Earlier today, he called Zelensky Putin. And then he very quickly followed that up with, on the first answer to the question, he called his own Vice President Trump. That's not only just embarrassing, but that is exactly what people are going to focus on. Do you understand? It's the worst of both situations. If he had actually, well, I guess the other situation would be that he just had a banger session and then liberals would be on copium mode and liberals would be like riding with Biden super hard. The holdouts, the dead enders, rather, would be extra aggro. However, what ended up happening is he gave them just enough ammunition to say, see, it was a one-off. So they'll get even crazier in the upcoming days as more and more Democrats come out and demand he step aside. After hearing this, what would you say the odds are that he's the Democratic candidate come November? I don't know, because I don't know how fucking stupid the Democratic Party is. I don't know how cowardly the Democrats can be. News. Moments after President Biden concluded his news conference, House Intel top Democrat Jim Himes calls on Biden to step aside. He calls Biden a remarkable leader of unparalleled public service, but he no longer believes that Biden is the strongest candidate to beat Trump. I am too scarred from my experiences with the Democratic Party in 2016 to believe that they won't stay the fucking course, okay? It brings me no pleasure to report this to you, but I have seen the depravity and the feckless cowardice from the Democratic Party before. And guess what? That was Hillary Clinton. She was actually technically, polls were cucked or whatever, but she was still beating Donald Trump in the polls at least. So I do not know how far that, I don't know how unimaginably cucked the Democrats can get. Okay. I don't know. So I can't give you a adequate prediction that you want. But yes, of course, MSDNC is saying he knew the facts. He's with it. He's coherent because they're doing cope mode. A pretty amicable way to tie this together is actually this, which saves face for the Democratic Party and doesn't call into question like the 25th Amendment, which is skeptical congressional Dems saying Biden proved to them in this press conference that he can be president, but not necessarily that he can win. Two separate things, one told me. Does that make sense? So this way, the entirety of the Democratic Party is not being called into question as, accomplices that knew how Biden's mental faculties had deteriorated to a degree where he can't win the presidency and he can't even be the president. But ultimately, he performed, especially as it pertains to foreign policy, in the expected way. He did. And I think you guys don't see that because you're obviously focusing on the things that everyone else is seeing. The average person is not going to look at this situation and have their takeaway be, oh man, Biden is so good. No one is saying that. But those in positions of power, those in the media, for example, are going to talk about the flubs, but they will also give him good marks on his NATO talking points because he did do that. He performed as well as expected when it comes down to American foreign policy. Obviously, every single American and every single person globally is going to be like President Putin, what the Vice President Trump, what the and the resignations will come, will keep on coming. Here, let's hear what Jim Himes has to.
Who is at the press conference with President Biden and was in the room. Mike, your impression having been there?
Yeah. Well, Chris, as somebody who has covered President Biden for 16 years, there's so much to unpack from this news conference. I thought so interesting to hear what he said about the prospects for a convention in which delegates could vote their conscience. He talked about being open potentially to a neurological exam, and if the doctors recommend that. He talked about being willing to pass the baton to Vice President Kamala Harris if his advisors can convince him that he can't win and that she can. But I think for so many people watching this news conference, we can boil this down to two moments. The first was President Biden giving an extensive answer, a detailed answer, an answer full of decades of experience on the world stage to the question about the future.
Normally, I agree with you, but I think you're underestimating how well this presser will be received. What do you mean? I'm saying that the presser is going to get good marks, especially on foreign policy.
If you want to know why President Biden wants to see this through, wants to finish the job, it's because he thinks no one else can match that experience that he has in dealing with the most important foreign policy question of our time. It was a long answer. It was an extensive answer. It really was illustrative of how he's...
Oops, we lost the MSDNC. So anyway, the other side of this conversation for the average person is that the takeaway from this is that he's a malignant narcissist that is sowing chaos and disorder in the Democratic Party, which was, ironically, the strongest positions the Democrats had against Trump and the Republicans, especially among moderate voters and independents. He will not be able to make up that gap by being an expert on NATO, okay? By seemingly coming across like he knows what he's talking about when it comes to foreign policy. This is not something that people care about as much, okay? I keep saying this. This is the worst community to say this in because obviously you guys are dialed into all of American foreign policy to a degree that is a detriment when you're analyzing the election. So you think inside of your own bubble that everyone cares as much as I do, whether it be the NAFO Andes, the Ukrainian flag in the bio Andes, or vice versa. But ultimately, I do not believe that the average American cares about foreign policy all that much. But as far as we're talking about like strengthening NATO allegiances and whatnot, that is not going to put you across the finish line. Okay? Americans care about the money in their pockets, care about how everything is expensive, which he made some decent statements about as well. But ultimately, they care about the flubs because they think Biden is too old and too incompetent, which he gave enough ammo for the media cycle to continue on that front. So ultimately, it wasn't such a spectacular defeat for him that like even Biden has to resign in disgrace from the presidential race. Here is, by the way, here's the greatest indication Don Jr. over on Rumble is praising Biden's performance, saying he's doing okay and he could stay in if he wanted to. He's not too bad. This lines up with the narrative that the Trump campaign wants Biden to stay in because it has a strategy to beat him, but not Kamala Harris. I haven't listened to you in over a year. Joe stuff got me stopping by. I can confirm I don't give a shit about NATO. I just want my rent to quit being so stupid high. And for the guy who's not insane to not be a geriatric mumbling buffoon. Exactly. Right now, there's a lot of holdouts in terms of voting for the Democrat or maybe even the Republican, but I think mostly for the Democrat. Now, that's my own personal assessment of the situation. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh, yeah, I really want to vote for Trump, but like, I don't know. As much as there are people who are like, I just don't want to vote at all for either of these guys. They're both old. One's a convict. The other one's a cadaver. Who gives a shit? My life is not going to change. So how do you get those guys motivated? How do you get those guys to come back into the fold? Well, having an 800-year-old demon is not going to be that guy. Okay, it's not going to be the method. It's not going to be the way to do that. And even if Biden magically, like I said, even before this process started, even if he magically became this phenomenal orator out of nowhere, if the talking points simply stand on NATO, even if he did a phenomenal job with the speech and he just like nailed it on all of the NATO talking points and whatever, ain't no American gives a about that, dude. Are you kidding me? We're selfish from the jump anyway, even if you think NATO is a good thing, okay, which I objectively do not, but that's besides the point. No American is like, oh man, yeah, this is my NATO. I'm the NATO voter, okay? If you were to ask every single American right now, do you care about beefing up NATO alliances or do you care about healthcare? Like you have to pick one, for example. Not that this is a real equation, obviously. Well, kind of is, but it's not a direct one-to-one. Like almost 100%, probably like 99%, with the exception of the most Redditor-brained neoliberal out there, 99% of Americans will be like, no, I want healthcare. What the are you talking about? That's why it doesn't really matter that NATO is Biden's bread and butter, but I'm not convinced the American public cares about foreign policy all that much. Ultimately, his best points are on an issue that is otherwise not helpful for his reelection chances, and everything else, as far as his like performance goes, was not good enough. And I don't even think that there is a performance that is good enough for Biden to dig himself out of the polling hell that he has found himself in. Do you understand? Also, CNN reports Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi have spoken privately about Biden and the future of his campaign, and they both expressed concerns about how much harder they think it's become for the president to beat Donald Trump. Breaking, CNN, based on discussions with more than a dozen members of Congress, operatives, and multiple people in touch with both Obama and Pelosi, that many say the end for Biden's candidacy feels clear, and at this point, it's just a matter of how it plays out. It's going to get messy over the course of the next couple of days, for sure.